Never buy these types of homes. There was a quick story I want to tell you about a couple, and the guy's name was Cal, and he met his girlfriend in the French Alps skiing. So they decided to do a backpacking tour of all across Europe. So they get back home and they decided that they wanted to buy a house. Young couple, probably in their mid to late 20s. So Cal, the guy, was responsible for buying a house. So they decided that they wanted to be in Scotland, in Glasgow in particular, a vibrant city there. And so the boyfriend, he goes to the auction, and he had never been to an auction before. And he looked at his list, and he was able to identify some homes that he liked. But all the homes that he identified were already sold by higher bidders. So he decided to randomly hold his hand up for a house that he saw on the list, and he saw the photos, and it looked decent. No one else raised their hand except him. So ultimately, he was able to win the bid. Once he won the bid, he called his girlfriend, and the girlfriend said to him, yes, we should buy the house. Meanwhile, his phone was dying, so they really couldn't have a full conversation. She agreed, he agreed, so he bought the house. Meanwhile, the moment he bought the house for £10,000, he realized he made a bad mistake. The first thing he noticed was that the house was not in Glasgow, Scotland. It was in a place called Dunoon, which is 35 miles away. Now, by ferry or by train, they can get there within an hour. Fair enough. Not only that, they ultimately decided to travel to the house, him and the girlfriend. When they get there, it was in shambles. The whole house was moments away from falling down. The whole house was what they call it was a derelict. Okay, it was dilapidated. No electrical, no plumbing, no roofing. Now, the house was a Victorian style house, which made it really good. The other component to this, which made this story all the more bad, is that he only owned 1/4 of the house. There were 3 other owners who owned the house. So therefore, he had to go out and talk to all the other owners, who ultimately was able to sell him their shares at a smaller discount because they knew that they would not be able to renovate the house. So he was able to work that out. But just imagine that. Now, meanwhile, they did not have the money to renovate the house right away. So they got a little caravan, parked it in the backyard of the house because they had to live somewhere. So, and they worked and saved and renovated the house piece by piece. Now, the community that was there got involved. They would help them out. And not only did they help them out, but the couple also got their hands dirty and they did all the renovations in the house themselves, which is absurd to me. All the renovations that they could do, probably not the plumbing and electrical, but all the carpentry work was done by them too. Now, when you think about this fact that this couple was able to renovate the house, they were able to get the house in good standing, and then they were able to move in. That took 2 years, 2 entire years to do that whole process. Now, with that being said, you may think about that this sounds like a very cute story, and there's triumph here, and that they were able to get through everything and all the hardships and struggles that they had to do. Fair enough, right? But no, this is not how you buy a house. This is not the process. They made a lot of strategic errors here. Number one, they bought a house at an auction that needed work as a first-time home buyer. You never do that if that's just your first home. Why? Because you're going to make a bunch of mistakes renovating the house. It took them 2 years to renovate this house. I can only imagine the reason why it took them 2 years. Number two, they did not have the money to renovate the house. So they had to work and save and live that way. Now, they were young, so they were able to do that. But that's not the best way. You always have the money to renovate the house in your bank account the moment you buy the house. Okay? And then this guy bought a house where the location wasn't even the location that they wanted to be in. It was 35 miles away. Another bad mistake. I mean, that's the least you can do is research where you're gonna live at. I mean, now for him, I understand he was at the auction, so I get how he could have made that mistake. But ultimately, you don't want to make that mistake. You see, what happens when you buy a house that you did not intend to buy a house, you're essentially stuck, or you're trapped in that position until you're able to do one or two things. Number one, which is probably the best alternative to do, is to sell the house, right? But you have to pay for commissions anywhere from 6 to 10%, and sometimes these closing cost fees can get a bit higher depending on what happens in the process of selling a house, right? And so if you just bought the house, that means you're going to lose money when you sell the house. Not a good idea. The second thing to do is to spend money on top of bad money to renovate the house, which can be anywhere from 10 to 15% of the selling price. So let's say the house is $300,000. You spend another $15,000 to renovate the house on top of just buying the house. That's spending, so that's also not a good idea to do, because while the house is being renovated, you got to go stay at a friend's house, or you got to go live in an Airbnb until the house is renovated, which costs more money and is more time. So ultimately, you don't want to make the mistake of buying a bad house. You want to make sure that the house you're in, you go for 4 or 5 different things that you really want for that house. Now in this video, we're going to discuss 10 powerful principles that you can use to set yourself up properly to buy a good house, right? So I'm going to take you through all 10 steps in detail so you can know what to avoid. Now, before we get into it, hit the like and subscribe button to get more content just like this. So let's get right to it. Number 1, you never want to buy a house in the wrong location. Now, what is considered the wrong location? Well, the number one thing to consider is the population that's happening in that particular neighborhood. In particular, in Chicago, where I'm from, the population has declined over the last 9 years. I mean, granted, I live in New York City, so I am part of that statistic. But you have to understand the reason why. Why is it that the population has declined in Chicago, right? I thought it was because of high crime. By the way, another thing is you never buy a property in an area that has high crime or that has crime that's increasing, right? If you see crime that has decreased, there may be something you could do, but ultimately don't buy homes in areas where the crime is high. So anyway, if the population, such as Chicago, is decreasing, you got to understand why. And for me, from what I figured out based on the data, is that the median household tax for homes is really high. It's the highest in the country. When you think about the median property taxes for Chicago, it's the highest in the country of the United States of America. That's absurd. Also, the sales tax rate is pretty high, sitting at a whopping like 10%, a little over 10%. Okay, that will discourage anyone from living in that particular community, that because the cost of living is higher, right? So this is not an area you would buy in because people are leaving the area. People need to realize that in order for you to buy a house, and then for that house to have equity down the road, the population has to increase, right? Because when the population increases, that means that the demand for homes increase, which ultimately increases values of properties, which means that the house that you buy in that community is going to increase in value. This is the same thing that happened to me when I was in Newark, all right? The home that I bought increased in value because a lot of people from New York City moved to New Jersey because the home values were so low. But over time, as more and more people live and move to that particular city, home values increase. Rental prices increases for apartments, right? So look at that population, make sure that the population is increasing and not decreasing. Okay, number 2, never buy a home from an LLC. Why? Because oftentimes a lot of these LLCs are investors who buy homes at a discount and they renovate the house and resell the house for a profit, right? The problem is though is that they tend to cut costs, in particular when things get tight, when the budget gets tight, right? And they cut costs on the rehab. And one of the clearest ways to know whether or not the house is going to be good, the moment you walk into the house, you can tell by the finishes of the house. Are the finishes crooked? Is the paint job look a little weird? Was the cabinets crooked? If you see that, that's a problem. You don't want to buy homes in that particular. You don't want to buy that house, right? Because if they did that from how it looks, just by you walking into the house. Just imagine what they did behind the scenes that you can't see, right? Who knows if they got the proper permits for their electrical or for their plumbing or for the structural problems that was or could have been in that house, right? There could be a leak in the roof that you don't even know because you don't know whether or not the contractor did it properly, right? But if you buy a house from someone that has owned a house for a very long time, right? That's the type of homeowner you want. Somebody that puts a house on the market that's owned it for 10 years or 5 years or 20 years. That's a good house to buy, because there's not profit motivating from the sense that the work inside the house wasn't done right or wrong. Now you got to still look to see whether or not the work was done right or wrong, but most times they're not they're just not an investor. It's just a different mindset. So, quick story. I remember when I did this 2-family house, I ran out of money. Okay, the electrical was done, the plumbing was done, the roofing was done, but everything like the bones of the house were done. But I had to go in there and paint myself, and I had to do the bathroom towels myself because I couldn't afford anyone to do it. Now, these are things that I can do. Okay, let me tell you, that bathroom towel was crooked. The broker came into the bathroom and said, "Hey, man, your bathroom towels are crooked. Who did this job?" And I had to, say that I did it. I had to admit, I did it, man. By the way, it wasn't that crooked. It was a little off. I think I did a good job. Okay, but again, I'm not a professional. There's no reason why I should be renovating or even putting tile up for a bathroom. Okay, it doesn't make sense. So all you got to do in order to find who owns the house is go to the property records, right? Sometimes they have it on Zillow. But if you go to the property records in that city or county, you can just go and see who owns the house at that time. You can figure it out. It's from an LLC. Be leery if you have to buy from an LLC. Just buy from an LLC from a reputable company that has done good work, where you can look at their references and see people that have bought other homes from that particular company. And then you can set yourself up to say, okay, this is all that's available on the market, and maybe there's something you have to do. But ideally, don't do it. Okay, number 3. Homes that have foundational or structural issues. Never buy these types of homes. Why? Because the permit process of getting the problem fixed can be costly and timely. Okay, the inspectors will nick and pick at you about every little thing about whatever it is that need to be fixed. Okay, this beam here is not proper. This isn't done right. And you don't want to go through that process. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money to get that properly done or get it properly fixed. So never buy homes where the walls are leaning, 1/4 of the house is crooked. Don't do stuff like that. Buy a house that's already structurally sound. Also, by doing this, you want to make sure that you have a home inspector to come into the house to see if there are some structural or foundational issues. Because if you're not a real estate investor, you don't have that type of eye to really see whether or not there are foundational issues. But a home inspector will. And if he doesn't know, then that's a problem. But in most cases, the home inspector should know. Also, there's other issues that come up too when you get that home inspection done that you pay for by getting that home inspection. So always get a home inspection to see if there are termites in the basement, left side floor, or whatever. Just make sure that the home inspector is doing a good job. Okay, number 4. I was reading this book in The Millionaire Mind. They talk about how millionaires become millionaires. And what are some of their habits? One of their habits is that they don't buy homes at market value. They ask for some discount or they walk away, right? They leave them with some equity in the house from day one. Now, obviously, they're not an investor in the sense where they buy, renovate, and resell. They're just looking for just a little bargain. It could be 5% off the market price, 10% off the market price. If you get 15%, good for you. This is the type of home to buy. Okay, you never want to buy a home at market value and not get any profit the day you buy the house. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Okay, nothing wrong with doing that. But you really want to buy a house that has a good market, like a discounted from the market price. Now, obviously, one part I missed in my first part about picking the wrong location is that you ultimately want to buy homes where the public school is good. Granted, if you have kids or you're trying to start a family, right? because that, you know, that would determine how you pick and choose a house, right? So if you go into a neighborhood where, let's say, you can't get that 10% off, but it has a good school district, okay, go for it. You know what I'm saying? Because it makes sense for you. But if you don't have to worry about that concern, and let's say you can do both, maybe you can get the house at 10% off, 15% off, and still able to live in that school district that has great schools. So that's something to consider. Number 5, never buy homes that's over 100 years old, because a lot of the systems in the house are outdated. Okay, the electricity is outdated, the plumbing is outdated, and to update these old systems takes time and money. So all you got to do, go to the property records, see when the house was built, and don't buy homes that is over 100 years of age. Now, if the developer or the person that renovated the house tell you that they did new plumbing, new electrical, they got permits to prove it, and they've done everything right in terms of the structural integrity of the house, then you can buy a house that's like that. But generally speaking, stay far away from them. Don't do it. Buy you a home that's under under 50 years of age. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, are better homes to buy than that particular house. Okay, moving along. Don't buy homes with bad plumbing. Okay, plumbing issues can be problematic. Okay, everybody needs plumbing in their house, and they need good plumbing. So one key thing to look at is asbestos. Asbestos was used in the mid to late 1900s because they would use it as a fire-resistant type of chemical. They use it for piping, and then also they would wrap the pipes in asbestos to go against fire, right? A lot of ships used them back in the day. In any event, asbestos emit chemicals that can harm people. So that's why right now they've been outlawed. So you can't use asbestos anymore. So, but if you see a house with asbestos, stay far away from it. Another thing is avoid lead pipes. If they're ingested inside your body, they can be really harmful. The home inspector, again, should tell you about asbestos, and he should tell you about these lead pipes. There's also another pipe you should avoid, which is galvanized steel pipes. Okay, they're very harmful to you. They're not good for you. Galvanized steel pipe, they burst inside out, and they can leak throughout the house, and that can cause more money, more time, and more stress. So stay away from those 3. These are the 3 types of plumbing issues you should stay far away from. Moving along here, avoid bad electrical. And the main thing you gotta just avoid with bad electrical is what they call knob and tube wiring. Okay, these are old wiring that was like the first wiring that was ever done back in like, late 1800s, early 1900s. This is what they use. Okay, not good. If you have knob wiring in your house, do not buy the house, because you're gonna have to remove all that knob wiring, tear down all the walls, put in new knob wiring, which costs money, and then you gotta get permits for it because it's gotta be done right. Okay, so do not get knob wiring. Moving along here, don't buy homes in flood zones. Now, there are different type of flood zones here. Now, you have flood zones that are just like a typical flood zone, like if you buy a beach or if you buy a body of water, then that's considered a flood zone. But if you are not, let's say, by that, but you have different type of flood zones. You have 100-year flood zones and 500-year flood zones. The insurance company is going to charge you a bit higher because of these flood zones. So stay far away from them, because you're going to pay more in insurance for them. All right. And lastly, don't buy homes with oil tanks in them. Okay. Never do that, because if the soil is contaminated, the owner of that land is going to have to get it remediated. Essentially, you have to clean up the oil in that particular plot of land, right? So, which can cost anywhere from upwards till about at least $250,000. So you never do that. You buy a house with no oil tank. Or if you want to buy a house with an oil tank, you have them remove the oil tank and make sure that the soil was tested. Right? This is what happened to me. I bought a house where the oil tank was in it, but there was a clause in the contract that said they had to remove the oil tank. So I signed a contract. So before we closed on the house, I had to remove the oil tank. We remediated the soil, Everything came back clean. Then we closed on the house. Okay, that's how you do it. Okay, and look, stay far away from it. Never do it, because you just don't know what oil has seeped in the ground. Also, let's say if you still want to buy an oil tank that's part of the property, but you don't want to remove the oil tank, then you could put sand in it. But even then, that's still not good. Okay, never buy it. Just a couple of other things to be on the lookout for. Don't buy ugly homes, because if you buy an ugly home, then you won't be able to resell the house because it's ugly. Okay, never do that. Don't buy homes with flat roofs, because when it rains, it tends not to hold water. The rain can seep in. Okay, you can buy a house with a pitch roof. The roof comes down, the water can just fall off, right? But if you buy a house with a flat roof, water comes down on it, and then now it tends to just stay there, and it sits, and then it gets into the walls. I had a one-family house. Part of the roof was a flat roof. Whoever had the house before, they made an addition to the house, and they put a flat roof. Literally, every time it would rain, I had to go over there and patch up the holes because the roof wasn't done right. I had to patch holes in the roof constantly. So don't do that. Don't buy near a cemetery. Who wants to look at dead people when they walk outside their house? Don't buy near a railroad track. Don't buy near a railroad track. Who wants to hear trains going back and forth all day long? Don't buy near power lines, because if you have kids, you don't want your kids to get electrocuted. Okay? Don't buy near a waste treatment plant. Who wants to smell chemicals being emitted into the air when you walk outside your house? Don't buy near a highway, in the sense that when you back outside your house, you back into the highway. Never do that. Don't buy student purpose condos. Why? Because the rules on who you can bring inside the house are going to be tough. Okay? Don't buy condos where the rules are really that tough. Don't do that. Don't buy homes on uneven hills or steep lands. Don't do that. In any event, I hope this video gives you some value. I have another video right here where you can learn more about real estate. And on that note, peace and love. Bye-bye.